Yep.
Yeah, I hear you, Ed.
Good, good. Well, it's one of those first day things. So welcome everyone to the 2021 Alaska AKSAF Annual Meeting, a virtual traverse of Alaskan forestry. My name is Ed Morgan and I'm the chair of Alaska AKSAF this year, and I'm a member of the Juneau chapter. Alaska is a huge state. We used to have 4 time zones from east to west, and it's just as vast from north to south. So this week, we're going to traverse Alaska from south to north, starting with our southernmost chapter, Dixon Entrance, which is located in the temperate rainforest of southeast Alaska. On subsequent days this week, we'll travel north through Alaska to our 5 Alaska chapters, ending on Friday with the Yukon River chapter, which is located in the boreal forest of interior Alaska. Along the way, we will cover a diversity of forest types, forestry issues, and management opportunities as we travel throughout the state. Today, our first day, we are fortunate to have our AKSAF president with us to give us some opening remarks. And just as a side note, I think, you know, at these meetings, we usually try to figure out who traveled the farthest to the meeting. Well, Jean, you virtually traveled the farthest to this meeting today. So with that, I would like to welcome our AKSAF president, Jean Kodama, and take it away, Jean.
Thank you very much, Ed. Sound good? The sound's on, everything sounds all right?
Yep.
All right. Well, appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Always a heck of a lot of fun to be with my friends in forestry, whether they happen to be foresters or just somebody related to forestry. And I'm sitting here in sunny springtime, South Carolina, looking out my window at my pond and forest tree farm, and it's about mid-80s right now. And I feel really bad for Chris Mash up there. It's almost minus 30, not almost, was it 29 below or something? So anyway, he'll have to feel bad by himself because I'm not coming. Anyway, I found forestry when I went to college at Clemson, and I didn't really know, as the first person in my family to go to a university and graduate, I had very little information what I was getting into, but just blessed to find forestry. And I've been all in since then. I've absolutely loved it. It's supported me and my family and even folks beyond me in ways that they just could not imagine, because I do love the outdoors and the people that that have those same aspirations and interests. And I worked at the university and got started there with being a grad student and research and school forest work and U.S. Forest Service for a couple summers here on the coast of South Carolina, and then almost 3 decades in forest industry and forest management, and then a lot of other things at the managerial level, like land transactions, commercial real estate, and some of that on my own when I left. And then I got into state forestry as a state forester in South Carolina and was there for 10 years and left in 2018. And since then, I've been focusing on my family and church activities, my tree farm, and a whole lot of forestry association work and assisting other landowners with projects and that sort of thing. And then AKSAF in the last year and a half or so has really been intense and a real pleasurable experience to try to give back. As Ed was talking about forest and forestry, they're critical to most of the U.S. for a wide variety of reasons. Critical to my home state of South Carolina. It's interesting. I was looking at Alaska. I think you had stated numbers: 129 million acres of forest. We're sitting at about 13 million acres of forest here in South Carolina, so about 1/10 of what you have up there in Alaska. But on a percentage basis, it's very high. Well over half the state is forested, and it's critical to the state. And forestry is critical to the country. It'd be in the top 10 manufacturing groups in 42 out of 50 states. So it's a big deal. With 1 million direct jobs in forestry and about 2.5 million if you look at total jobs in forestry across the country. So very important to our economy as well as environment. $300 billion in products are moved annually out of forest here in our country. So not only is it important from an economic standpoint, but environmentally and societally and every other way you can think about. And forestry supports us. I suspect everybody on this call here is either has an income or had one or is anticipating an income perhaps from forestry. So we do owe back to our profession in that it allows us to take care of ourselves and our families and give to others. And so we can all give back and support that profession. And we want to try to make things better. It really mirrors that vision for SAF of providing for today as well as tomorrow and for all those generations to come. I really like that Iroquoian philosophy. It's called a seventh generation philosophy. And in summary, it talks about how decisions that we make today should result in a sustainable world 7 generations from now. And I kind of think that really matches what we do in forestry, in that a lot of things that we do makes things better for those to come. We don't get to see it necessarily at the very end, but we'll know when we leave and we move on that we've made it better for future generations and our kids and grandchildren and those to come. So it's something that I think we can really be proud of. Not only did I use words like critical, but I think forestry is just as important as other professions like medicine and law, accounting, engineering, whatever you want to call out as a profession. Forestry is right up there among them. And you know, a lot of us would probably say it's higher than those in some aspects because it covers so many aspects of what we do, not just that's not the economic part of things. So with that said, that we have an opportunity now with the emphasis on things like climate change and wildfire and endangered species to make sure that forest and forestry get the proper billing through good, strong marketing and communications, both at a big level, nationally and internationally, but also ourselves as we talk to other people to know about what's going on and to explain to them, because a lot of folks just, they don't, you've had it happen. I know you have. People don't know what forestry is. They know what a forest is. They think they do anyway, but they usually don't know what forestry is. It gives us opportunities to talk about that. So we're there to do that, not only at an individual level, but also at that big policy and lawmaking level, to be at the forefront of telling folks what it is and why it's important and how forestry and forest are the answer and not the problem to some of the things that are going on. And we want to do it from a science-based approach. That's part of our SAF creed, is to do it with knowledge and not non-factual things that come out that folks say about some things like climate change. People ask me often, is this real? And it's like, absolutely, this is real. If you've ever studied anything about plants or geology or landforms or continental formations, absolutely there is climate change. We think about this, for example, where I'm living today, I'm at 65 feet above sea level. At one time, the ocean was at Columbia, South Carolina, which is in the center of the state. There's a sand dune formation right across the center of South Carolina, goes all the way into North Carolina and down into Georgia and into Alabama as it loops around in coastal plain. We were 300 and some feet below sea level at one point in time. Charleston was 360 feet or so, 380 feet below sea level. Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska was under the oceans at one point in time. You guys have the Bering Strait where folks actually came to populate the US 14 million years ago. So absolutely, not 14 million, 14,000 years ago, I think is the rough number when folks came across that land bridge. And so things do change, and we can't change some of that in forestry. nor can we change it by politics or policy, but we can do some things through active management to modify and do the best that we can, given those big changes are going to happen. And we haven't even mentioned the things like asteroids and sunbursts and all those things. The one that really got me the other day, I was reading about how the North Pole actually has moved to where the North Pole was actually almost near the South Pole. And that was 42 million years ago, I believe it was. So you could imagine the changes that would have happened when that occurred. So what we do is we do the best we can to modify things within our lifetime and the 7 generations perhaps that comes behind us. Thinking about active management, that's not only true within forest and forestry and things that relate to the natural environment, but it's also true within organizations. And when I filled out the form for a nomination for VP of Society of American Foresters, I put down on there that my focus and interest would be, given that I didn't know some of these things for sure, what was going on, I would be looking at financials, organizational alignment, and the structure of the organization to make sure we're all aligned along the same vision, and membership involvement, partnerships, and social license to be able to practice forestry. And as I've learned a little bit more about that as a year as VP and now a few months as president, I'm seeing that we do have very good active management, just like you might in a forest. And our leadership, both at the staff level of those that work for the association, a couple dozen people almost, but the leadership as well in volunteers. When I had these and get names for committees, I had to ask people, a lot of people I've never met. And Tammy and Terry helped me a lot to locate people for committees. And I was amazed when I did that, because to a person, they all said yes. What can I do? How can I help? There were people that we had to turn away, maybe a couple, 3 people for positions because there were others that were maybe a better fit at the given time. And I only had one person to say no. And the only reason for that was they'd accepted a huge leadership responsibility in something else. So we really have a bunch of volunteers and a membership that's ready to work. Partnerships, we have a very good system set up with partners. Terry stays on board with this, and I think we do as individuals too, working with other organizations in the forestry community. But we really got that, and it's just solid. I think with regard to social license, that's one we got to continuously work on, because it ebbs and flows as people have interest in the environment and forest and that sort of thing. And we've lost some social license, particularly in the northwestern United States, a little bit in some other places, but I think that was the most dramatic loss when we had the spotted owl issue and all that out there. But we need to continually communicate internally and externally and be very, very effective at that. One of the benefits of active management is Terry and the others at SAF. A lot of kudos to them and Susie Metz in finance. There were some opportunities to capture some funds that were out there that they would have, in an accounting standpoint, they'd have been written off as something that's old and you just write it off as gone. But they pursued it, and we ended up with like $120,000 from an old trust fund, an insurance program and we were able to use that for marketing and membership and diversity and all those good things that we need to do without even taking anything out of our budget. So finances are excellent. We got about $18 million in assets, about a $3 million a year budget. So those are in good shape. Selling that building and facility was really the right thing to do at the right time. We're firmly in place in DC now. That money, 1.9 million, was invested and generating income now that can be used to support the facility in DC. So the facility is in good shape. We got good member involvement. Our strategies are sound, but we're going to look at that and see how we make sure we're properly aligned and prioritized on that. We're doing that now. We got staff back. When Terry came in, we were way low on staff, probably half of what we needed. And he has done a fantastic job of hiring people in the right spots. So we're in good shape there. pretty well fleshed out unless we find a need we haven't seen yet. The two areas that we need some work on for sure, and I mentioned this in the president's message. Hope you folks have seen it. If not, please take a look at the last Forester bulletin that we did. I was able to write, you're allowed so many words, so I tried to focus on that. I put a little blurb in there about these two items and did a video on my tree farm talking about active management and that sort of thing. But we got two areas that really need work. And one of those is our organization administratively, because we're well over 100 years old and developed over the years with various ways of being organized, and new things have come down the pipe as far as taxes goes and how nonprofits are organized. We really got to work on that. Won't really affect, I don't think, too many individual units, but on a big scale, we really do need to work on that. And it is going to be and is being addressed. And now membership, that's the one that really is scary for me, because it's been dropping for so many years at a fairly significant rate that we really need to work on that and get it turned around. At in the end of 2018, we had 10,884 members. At the end of 2020, we had 9,515. Just a year or so before 2018, we had well up over 11,000 members. So we've dropped significantly in the past several years, just like we have been over the past good many years. And I believe we can turn that around. I'm confident that we can, working with staff and others to put some things in our pocket so we can make sure we have a good value presentation. We're going to come out here in the next month or so with an initiative to try to turn that ship around and get it stopped. I'd love to see it above 10,000. I was hoping I'd get in before it went below 10, but I didn't make it. But I believe with all of us working together, we can go I want to be above 10,000, and I believe y'all do too by the end of this year. We can do that. We got members coming in, we got members going out. We just need more members coming in to make that happen. I'm confident that we can do that. So just be looking out for that, because we're going to ask for some assistance to make that happen. And there are a variety of reasons. We've talked about those before. I won't get into those. I don't have enough time to get into all those reasons. But so what I want to do is work with you folks and everybody else in our organization to try to get us back above 10,000 by the end of this year. And we've done things like that in past organizations I work with, where you ask a member to get a member, you do some recruiting, and pretty soon in a time when you were going south, you're going to be going north, I believe, pretty quickly. What I'd like to see is, and this is one of the suggestions to our staff, was to start a program. It's called something like 10 by 22, say 10,000 by year 2022. And I believe that'll help us be able to have a clear message out to the membership for something we want to ask for us to all get behind. So I think in summary, we can ask what we can do for SAF. I like President John Kennedy's message years ago, where he said, don't ask what America can do for you, but ask what you can do for America. Why don't we ask ourselves? Because for me, forestry has been such a great thing for me and my family that I should be asking personally, what can I do for forestry and SAF, not what it can do for me. And I believe if we take that attitude, that we'll move forward a lot more effectively, and we'll bring more people into the fold when they see how enthusiastic we are about a profession that we all love and that has done so many good things for us. And when I was asked by another person, spending so much time on this, are you being paid? And the answer is absolutely. I've been paid for 40 some years. Forestry's been paying me since I got my first paycheck at Clemson University working on the state forest. So I've been paid for decades. And that's the way I look at that. And I think we should all think about, how can we give back? How can we help and make forestry and forest better for future generations? So I look forward to working with you and making everything better. for our country, for forestry as well.
Well, thank you, Gene. I really appreciate your comments. And we all appreciate that you've traveled this far to come to our Alaska meeting.
You're welcome.
Now, we'll change directions a little bit and we'll move on to our first installment of this week. The Dixon Entrance Chapter Chair, Bob Durland, is going to take over the meeting now, and you're up, Bob.
Yeah, I'm going to pass this over to Jim Tuttle, our Secretary Treasurer.
Thanks, Bob. Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Dixon Entrance Chapter presentation of the state meeting. A little bit about the chapter. Dixon Entrance Chapter of the SAF represents communities of southern and southeast Alaska, including Wrangell, Petersburg, Gregg, Klawock, Thorn Bay, Kaufman Cove, Hyder, Metlakatla, and of course Ketchikan. And within this area lies the 16.2 million acre Tongass National Forest, as well as the land bases of numerous Alaska Native Village corporations and Sea Alaska Corporation, which is the regional native corporation for this area. This region has traditionally been rich in timber, scenic, and other natural resources, although the timber industry has seen a significant decline in the past 20 years or so. Much of the current timber harvest of Sitka spruce, western hemlock, western red cedar, and Alaska yellow cedar is processed by the last remaining sawmill of any significant size in this region, the Viking Lumber Mill on Prince of Wales Island, which consumes approximately 20 million board feet annually. So that's the background of the area and of the area we represent, and kind of synopsis of the state of the industry here in this region. With that, we have, I'd like to present our first speaker, who is Sheila Spores. She is the Forest Management Staff Officer for the Tongass National Forest Supervisor's Office here in Ketchikan, where she's been working on the Tongass since 1992. She currently oversees the timber program on the Tongass, but originally focused her work mainly on silviculture efforts on the forest. She has earned her master's degree in ecosystem management from the University of Montana and has a very well-rounded background of all things relating to the management of the Tongass National Forest. She is going to give her presentation on a partnership with the state, an overview of the joint efforts to improve inventory information and forest management planning on the Tongass. So with that, Sheila, I'd like you, I'll turn this over to you.
All right. Thanks, Jim. And, you know, you said that I got my master's in ecosystem management from University of Montana, but I also have a bachelor's of science in forest management from there. And I just found out maybe 5 minutes after I talked to you this morning that my son got accepted into the Davidson's Honors College at the University of Montana. So,
Oh, Grizzlies.
proud mama. Yeah. So we're going to have a second generation University of Montana grad, but he is not picking forestry. So I don't know if that's good or bad. I mean, I would like, of course, it would be great to have he would be a third generation forester because I'm a second generation, but you know, I'm happy to know he's going to be in Missoula. So anyway, thanks for that. I'm going to try sharing my screen here, and it worked before. So do you guys see the meeting box or do you just see my presentation?
Presentation.
Okay. Okay, good. It was a little stressful. We did a test on Thursday, but then I threw things, I threw wrenches in the network by coming into my office and putting my laptop into the docking station. So for those of you who have worked with me, you probably have seen my young growth presentation that I've given for years, and some of you have seen it way too many times. I've given it way too many times, so I'm pretty excited to have a whole different presentation to present today. So it's going to be discussing the partnership that the Forest Service, the tongass, entered with the state of Alaska, and it was to gain more inventory information about the young growth and management of our forest planning on the Tongass National Forest. Let me see if I can- Uh-oh, so I think there might be a delay on okay, there we go. So the Tongass National Forest during the you know, Jim mentioned that there is a medium-sized mill, but it's really not even that big. And but the Tongass was known for its long-term timber sale contracts and for large levels of timber harvest. And then we kind of followed in terms of controversy after the Pacific Northwest, and then the Tongass kind of became the focal point of the controversy of logging in old growth. And so during about 2010, we started getting a lot of pressure from the Department of Agriculture to transition to young growth. And, you know, we said, well, we have this forest plan from 1997, and it says that we're going to be transitioning in 2040 and, you know, to commercial thinning. And then by 2070, we'll be into our second rotation of young growth. And we were pretty much told that was too soon, that was too long out there, and try to figure out how to transition earlier. So in 2013, we were directed by the Secretary of Agriculture to basically revise our forest plan, amend it. And so what we did is we set up a federal advisory committee that was, you know, under the FACA. We set up the Tongass Advisory Committee, and that was a group of diverse members of interested parties across Southeast Alaska. And that's a picture of them here in the presentation. And so what they did is they worked together and came to consensus. And I know it wasn't easy. And Chris Mace was a part of that. And you can see him in this picture with a much smaller beard. So I know that it was a challenging time, but what they did is they came out with forest plan language that we actually adopted and turned it into Chapter 5 of our current forest plan. But in addition to the language in the forest plan, they also came up with a whole host of recommendations. And these included what they felt were actions that we should take to transition more quickly. And so one of those things was, you know, what kind of inventory do we have out there? We harvested, you know, 400,000 acres in a relatively short time span. And we had functioned as 3 separate forests. And so there was a lot of, folks felt that there was a lack of information on our young growth. So as a result, we entered into a challenge cost share agreement in June of 2015 with the Forest Service, or with the state of Alaska. It had a lot of partners. And then this is some of the folks that we worked with over the 5.5 years that this agreement was in place. There were 2 parts to the challenge cost share agreement, 2 main emphasis. One was inventory collection, and another one was workforce development. But I'm really focused, you know, I don't have a whole lot of time on this presentation, so I'm really focused on the inventory piece, and I'm just going to focus on certain elements of it. So if you worked on this and I leave something out, please don't feel too bad. So there were 2 main objectives to this inventory. Basically, was to determine what our actual stand attributes were. You know, what did we have in our young growth trees? What kind of species, what kind of height, diameter, how many trees per acre, And then also determine which acres of those young growth were no longer considered feasible for harvest. We started harvesting in the 1950s, 1960s, and then as we moved along and got forest plans, we had a forest plan in 97 and 2008, and it added standards and guidelines. And so areas that we'd originally harvested, were off area, so off limits. For example, we can't harvest in the beach, but that's where our first young growth harvest began. So the big question was, of those 420,000 acres of young growth, how many could you actually even harvest again? So that was the second goal. And just to highlight that, this shows a young growth stand that's outlined in black. And when you layer on some of the standards and guidelines post this harvest, you can see that we then have operational challenges. And so the red are our stream buffers that would be applied. And the kind of pinkish color is the soils restriction. So those show that slopes over 72%. So then the question then becomes is, those little slivers of young growth forests that are in between those stream buffers, for example, would we actually be able to harvest them? And, probably not. And so we really don't have a good idea of, are those a minimal amount of acres, or are they a significant number of acres? So that was kind of one of the objectives, was to kind of drill down and see how many acres we actually can harvest in the future. This was partway through the project, but this is kind of a map that we were aiming for. We'd have all of our young growth mapped, and then we would be able to look at the restrictions. And I don't know, can you guys see my cursor on the presentation? Okay, so for example, the forest plan in 97 said we can't harvest between sea level and 1,000 feet. The new forest plan put that at between 200 and 1,000 feet. We actually do have some opportunities. So, here's a map, and it has our 200 to 1,000 foot opportunity. And then, through ground truthing, these little pink crosshatches show where our karst is. And so then we have our proposed roads that it would take to actually, do a future harvest in young growth. When we were harvesting the first time around, a lot of our roads ended up at the bottoms of valleys, and it makes it really challenging for the next entry. So this was one example of what we were hoping to come out of from this effort. We did a lot of plots. So how this worked is state and private forestry, the Tongass National Forest, and the state of Alaska, along with some industry representatives, sat down, and we worked to come up with some kind of what stands did we want to inventory, what kind of stand plot intensity, what kind of attributes did we want to measure. So basically, we took almost 14,500 plots over the course of 4 years, and it covered 43,000 acres. We did one plot every 2.5 acres. The workforce development piece of the challenge cost share was used to have workforce academies, and they were conducted, and then the graduates of these 2-week to 3-week courses were then hired by the state of Alaska to help do plots. And so that was a success story, I think, mostly. I think it doesn't look high in numbers, but it's been great in that we were able to hire, I think I know now, at least 3 folks that were hired under this workforce academies to work for the state of Alaska now have permanent jobs with the Forest Service doing work in forestry. So how this worked is the state of Alaska inventoried the plots, and then the Forest Service provided logistical support and did quality control, quality assurance. A lot of plots. This is what it looked like on a map. So the red plots denote where the state of Alaska collected information, and the yellow stars tracked where the Forest Service went and did the same plots and kind of compared to make sure that we were all on the same page. So those were the quality control plots. So a lot of plots were done. It was a lot of data and a lot of ground covered. So here's just a picture of some of the Workforce Academy participants. So after collecting all this data, the Forest Service, we developed this young growth inventory portal. This is the, here is the web link to this site. And I don't know if it'll come up. Maybe you guys can tell me if you see it. Let me pull it, see if I can pull it over. Can you see it, Jim? Okay, nod your head because you're muted. Okay, good. So this is where we have all the data, and I'm gonna kind of scroll through to some of the actual data where we analyzed it and see if it it might be, might take too long to come up, but this is available to the public. And so on here, you know, we show where we mapped young growth trees per acre, and it showed the stocking. So if it was, if it's a blue, then it's poorly stocked. And then if it's red, it's highly stocked. And so obviously this area has been probably pre-commercially thinned, and that's why it's in the 0 to 300 trees per acre with the colors. If you guys are seeing this, has my screen caught up? Okay. And then, you know, you can scroll in and out and look at all the areas. So we have this one that shows the tree density. And then, you know, we have volumes, and I'll let this one draw up. And once this one comes up, so basically each of the squares that you see on this map represents one of the plots. And so you can see the one thing that really comes out is that our stands are variable. So, you know, these stands, even though they were all cut at the same time, they range from, you know, less than 5,000 board feet to the acre to more than 20,000 board feet to the acre, all in this space of, you know, 50 acres. So it does make our young growth much more challenging. So hopefully I can, if anyone's interested, we can get this website out to you, because it does have a lot of really interesting information. Here is the quadratic mean diameter by plot. And so you can see, again, there's a lot of variability. Some of the plots had a large average diameter. You know, oftentimes those are in the riparian areas or on well-drained slopes. And then, you know, we'd have these lower gradient places that were wetter, and they would have a smaller diameter. So that's just going through a little bit of that portal that has a lot of information that is available for anyone who's interested. And then here I just put some screen shares in. This is an example I just showed you on the real website, but this is the volume, and these are some of the challenges that we faced with how variable things are. And then go also, so to kind of get at that variability, this is one of the issues, is that the tongass has long based our young growth on harvest date. So it, you know, for example, this is a 2,300 acre stand that was harvested, you know, pretty much, probably it took a couple years, but in a relatively short span of time, it was 2,300 acres of harvest, and it's being treated in our vegetation layer as one stand. So one of the outputs of this was the state was contracted with Terra Verde, and they went in and redelineated our young growth polygons into ecological stands. So the dark pink in here is the original stand that I showed you on the previous slide. And then in here, you can see that the polygons were delineated more into area, what we would traditionally call stands. It was a lot of work. What we were able to do, Terra Verde was, and now we've been really tearing into this, is for one, the lines were really trued up to our old growth. Here's an old growth right here, and the pink is the original line. So you can see that in this area, it was called old growth, but it's really young growth. And you're like, that's not too big of a area, but it really adds up and causes a lot of noise when you try to do any kind of analysis without that fixed. So then we also had these labels assigned. So this is a hemlock spruce stand. And then it has these numbers that show, kind of have a relative size and stocking density. And what we can do now is, with all that data that we collected, if we collected plots in this stand through using FPS, the Forest Planning and Projection System by FBRI, we can then extrapolate that data into other polygons with the same label, but maybe didn't have plots. So now at the end of all that work that Terra Verde did while contracted by the state, we now have some kind of plot information, either real plot data or data that was extrapolated in all of our young growth stands on the tongass. And so then that allows us to do a much more robust kind of analysis on timing and when our young growth might be available for harvest and what that harvest may look like. Another output of this collaboration under this agreement, we also were able to acquire LiDAR data. And so what that has allowed for us, I'm just going to go through a couple screens of what that allows for us, is it's much easier to see where the streams actually lie on the ground. So that's one of the biggest parts of our fall down, is our streams aren't mapped where they actually are on the ground. And so it makes it really hard to do timber planning, because if you go out, you plan a polygon and you go out and you find a fish stream, it has to have a very large buffer on either side. And so that can really create a lot of fall down. This is contours. A lot of our forest only had 100-foot contours, and this is with 10-foot contours. And so you can see that, even though there's a road here, this is really steep right off, it's probably a cliff as you drive by. And so the areas of steep slopes just really highlight, they just really show in this LiDAR. And this is actually my last slide. And the next steps is we're working on another agreement with the state of Alaska. We're calling it CCSA 3 to expand our database across boundary lines. So take the information that we've developed for the tongass and then map the young growth on adjacent non-Forest Service lands, and hopefully apply similar attributes to them, and then be able to extrapolate some of the data that we have collected into those stands, and then eventually come up with a long-term plan for young growth across the region. So with that, I'm done, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, Sheila, in reference to your last point there, the next step where you're looking at transboundary, gathering information on adjacent Village Corp and Native Corporation lands, when do you think that'll start?
Well, when we go to, yeah, we're hoping that we'll be able to get most of the non-Forest Service landowners willing to, participate in this. We are working on the agreement, and it's currently an agreement without money. But once if we can get some funding, then that agreement would be in place immediately. But it is all dependent on getting it funded.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, I am not seeing any questions, so maybe
Wait,
everyone,
I see
Oh,
Jim
oh,
LaBelle waving his hand.
okay, now to see, it looks like Ken as well.
Okay.
You, are you ready for some input there? Just curious about something. The first real inventories that were done by FIA that actually looked at young growth were the 1970s inventories. The 1950s inventories were strictly focused on getting volume estimates for the old growth so they could get into the pulp mill business. The 1964 remeasurements were just a track on to make sure that following Sierra Club questioning of the data, that the data were correct in the 1950s. The 1970s, though, at that point, we began to look more at young growth as part of the inventory. There are a number of publications on that done by Bill Van Hees out of the Forestry Sciences Lab in Anchorage. And didn't know if you, I thought you were probably aware of that, but those are interesting data relative to first looks at young growth. Thank you.
Yes. No, thanks for mentioning that. There is actually, the tongass has a whole rich history of collecting data in young growth. We actually, I think it was maybe within the last 7 years, there was a remeasurement on R.F. Taylor's plots, which were set up in the 1930s. Some of them can still be found. And we have remeasurements of those same plots since the 1930s, and they've been used to recalibrate the FBRI model FPS. So yes. So Ken, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question. Do you have any idea how many people went through the academies you were talking about?
I'm gonna say, I know that we had 2 years of forestry academies, and I'm gonna say maybe 18 to 20 total on those. And then there was some stream academies, so probably another 10 to 15. Those are just rough estimates. I know that the state of Alaska is currently working on a summarization of this whole agreement, so that should be out, I think, soon.
Were those academies mostly local folks, or?
Yes. Yep.
Cool.
They were, I think all were conducted on Prince of Wales. Maybe one was in Cake. Yeah, the applicants were pulled mostly from, for the Prince of Wales ones, I think all Prince of Wales, and then maybe a couple from Ketchikan.
Okay, are there any other questions for Sheila? Thank you, Sheila.
All right, no, thanks.
Good job.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Bob, do you have anything else at this point? If not, I'll introduce Tessa.
Actually, one just came in. Charlie is asking, was there any effects noted for climate change?
That is not anything that we looked at for this effort.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is a one-time inventory. I think that we could use some of the remeasurement of R.F. Taylor. Maybe there's some potential, but as far as I'm aware, that information hasn't been used for climate change yet, but it could be because we have several remeasurements on the same plot.
Well, there's a potential for it, so that's good.
Okay, Bob, do you have anything else to add before I introduce
Nope.
Tessa?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. So our next presenter, Tessa Axelson, she is the executive director of the Alaska Forest Association that is based here in Ketchikan. As such, she oversees the Alaska timber industry's primary representative organization in dealing with the political and financial aspects of our industry, especially as they relate to the Tongass National Forest. Her background includes a master's degree in public administration from the University of Alaska Anchorage, and also many years with the Denali Commission, which was established by Congress in 1988 as an independent federal agency to provide critical economic and infrastructure support for rural Alaska communities. And Tessa will be speaking to the subject of habitat restoration considerations for the forest land owner. So Tessa, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate that introduction. Can I get a thumbs up from those of you who are able to see my screen? Perfect. Thanks, Jim. I'm actually going to be speaking to some other topics, including what Jim has mentioned briefly. What I wanted to do was talk about the status of the forest products industry in Alaska, specifically in the tongass, since that's where this chapter's, the Dixon entrance chapter is, and talk about changes that have occurred and also how that relates to opportunities that are presented in some of our partnerships, like the cost share agreement partnership that Sheila spoke about earlier. So just to begin here, give me a minute. It looks like there's a delay in advancing my screen. So do you all see the AFA history, purpose, and membership? Thank you. I just wanted to start by providing a bit of background on a couple of things. Number one, who AFA is and what they do, and then speak a little bit more about what that looks like for AFA as an industry representative specific to the tongass. So the Forest Association was established originally back in 1957. At that time, it was the Alaska Loggers Association and has had various iterations over the years. Its establishment in 1957 makes it one of the oldest industry associations in the state of Alaska. And our goal as an industry support organization is to advocate on behalf of our statewide membership on all matters related to the forest products industry in Alaska. And forest products industry is a title that I really want to key in on, because at some points in the AFA's history, we would have only spoken about the timber industry or the logging industry. But in fact, there is a very diverse forest products industry in Alaska. It's you all, I'm sure, that are outside the state on the left coast, the right coast, somewhere in the middle, hear consistently that Alaska is very big and we're very different and unique. And that certainly is the case for the forest products industry. The types of industry that we see operating in southern Southeast Alaska, in Southeast and the Tongass, looks very different than what we might see in the interior or in other national forests like the Chugach up in South Central. So for the purposes of today's conversation, I'm going to really hone in on what's occurring in the tongass, but I wanted to make sure that folks know that our representation for forest products industry stretches a membership across the state of Alaska, which is really diverse and changing. We also are unique as an industry association in that AFA offers its members program participation in some specific items. One of those includes the Tongass Timber Trust, which is a fully insured health plan, along with a defined contribution and 401k retirement plan. And really these uniquenesses are a manifestation of what the AFA was early on, a need as small operators began to emerge as there were transitions out of that large sawmill, large pulp mill time in the forest products history to have an opportunity for members to come together and receive benefits for health and retirement for their employees. And so that's a component of what we do. In terms of our governance structure, the Alaska Forest Association is a nonprofit entity and we're governed by a 16-member board of directors. We are also have associate members and they have a board. And Jim, by virtue of his role and employment with Sea Alaska, which is a member of the AFA, serves on our board. And there may be other board members on. I haven't looked through all the screens of the participants, but so in terms then of what our mission is and how that relates to some of what I want to talk about for the status of industry now and what is providing both challenges and opportunities to our industry. The association is directed to advance restoration, promotion, and maintenance of a healthy, viable forest products industry. And when we do so, to recognize that if we're doing that well, we're going to contribute to the economic and ecological viability of Alaska's forests and communities. And so to me, really what that means is we have a role in advancing the directives of our members, advocating on behalf of our members, and that takes a couple of different forms. We're doing that with our counterparts across the country. We are members of regional forest association bodies. We as AFA are members of the Federal Forest Resource Coalition, which represents the interest of industry associations across the country. We're looking into and advocating on behalf of changes in federal law, litigation that will change things for our federal agency partners, working with our state of Alaska legislature for issues that have come forward or bills that may change the way state agencies do business or may benefit or harm our membership in one manner or another. And so that advocacy also includes conversations with diverse groups that are outside of the industry associations and partnerships with other Alaska industry groups, such as those that are in the mining fields, in the oil industry, or in other resource development associations. So I think one of the things that's really important to share with you all is what the industry looks like now. And the looks like now piece is very intentional in this slide, because what has been interesting to me in about a year and a couple months into this job with the AFA is how frequently I hear stories told about the forest products industry in Alaska that are sometimes 2 decades and usually 4 decades old. And that occurs even within the state. It certainly is occurring in the press and with those outside the state. So I think it's important to talk about what the industry looks like now, and more specifically, what the industry looks like here in the Tongass. And so the days of pulp mills and large sawmill operations are done in Alaska, and we do not anticipate that they will return. So really, the operators that are in the Tongass now are small business operators. When we talk with folks at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and our partners at the U.S. Forest Service, when we have an opportunity to speak with the secretary or the undersecretary's office, one of the things we like to try to do is say, you know, we're talking about small business operators that are akin to small family farming operations in the Midwestern parts of the country. And we do this because the forest products industry looks very different, for example, in the Carolinas or in parts of the Northwest in the US or in Montana than it does in Alaska. So these small business operators, there's a handful of them in the Tongass, probably 6 in total. That would include Viking Lumber, which was referenced in the introductory portions, which is the only remaining medium-sized mill in Southeast Alaska. There are also some other small mills and chip mills that are operating both in southern Southeast Alaska and in other parts of the state. One of the other pieces of interest that I think it's important to note that makes the Alaska and specifically the Southeast operating within the Tongass industry very different is we are primarily an export market. So this means that in Southeast Alaska, for our operators, they are sending logs over to the Asian market, primarily China, to some degree Japan, and the vast majority of what the industry does is related to exports. So that has changed significantly in the from the early decades of what timber industry harvests looked like in Alaska. And that also means that what I'm going to talk about just here in a bit is the industry in Alaska is subject to significant challenges related to what's occurring both from international relations, tariffs that are occurring with other countries, and changes within the export market. So in terms of jobs and economic development, who do we employ? How many folks are there? What's the investment? This is a big transition as well. 25 years ago, the forest products industry, specifically the logging industry, was one of the leading employers in the state of Alaska. And now we're in less than 5% of the employment numbers in Southeast Alaska. We currently employ about 400 individuals with total earnings of about $20 million. And the forest products industries, particularly in Southern Southeast, is really proud of the fact that I think I'm going to be the first one to mention it since we started our Zoom today. There was something called COVID that happened. I don't know if you all recall in the last 18 months. We are really proud as an industry that we were designated as critical infrastructure by the governor of the state of Alaska, Governor Dunleavy, and that our industry was able to continue to operate throughout the course of COVID in remote work sites with the challenges of getting workforce folks from outside the state into Alaska, given our testing requirements. And so that was a very unique situation for our industry. One of the other uniquenesses of our industry is that there's opportunity right now, given some of the economic challenges that Southeast in particular is facing, given that there will be likely no cruise ships, certainly no large scale cruise ship sailings to Southeast Alaska in the summer of 2021. The industry stands ready to scale up its operations and to hire folks. The vast majority, over 85% of the jobs in the Southern Southeast timber industry are year-round benefit, health insurance jobs for working families. And we take that very seriously and are really proud of that. The challenge is that we currently don't have the supply that we need in order to do that. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. One other piece that is also important that AFA is currently working on with some of our partners in other industries is to provide data and linkage between what the forest products industry is doing and what we are doing to support other secondary and tertiary business operations in Southeast Alaska and the Tongass, also in other areas of the state. But for example, the picture that you're seeing here of logs being loaded onto a cargo ship that will take those over to foreign markets. This involves and requires fueling from local distributors. This requires the work of tug and barge operators. This requires the contracted work of stevedores, the supplies for remote camp outfitters, all of these other businesses that have a significant connection to the forest products industry. So we're currently working to gather data from our membership to provide some detailed numbers on how our industry interrelates to and is integral to the success of other small business operations in Southeast and in other parts of Alaska. So we would be remiss to talk about the industry in Alaska and certainly in Southeast Alaska and in the Tongass if we didn't talk about the very unique land ownership model that exists in Alaska. I'm going to begin by saying something that's related to the last bullet. Less than 1% of land is held privately in Alaska. I'm just going to say that again. Less than 1% of the land in Alaska is held in private ownership. This means that the model for how the industry works with our landowners is very different than what it is for many of our counterparts in the lower 48. So it would be the case that when I have an opportunity to speak with my colleagues in other industry associations across the country, a very small percentage or a much lesser percentage of the work that their operators and members do is with a federal or state landowner. The vast majority of it is done with private entities. So here in Alaska, and specifically in the Tongass National Forest, the federal government, the US Forest Service, is the landowner for approximately 90% of the land. You also have ownership by the state of Alaska, and I've differentiated that into three categories. There's obviously the state itself, working through the Department of Natural Resources and their Division of Forestry. The University of Alaska, which operates a land program, though it has been very minimal in recent history. Then the Trust Land Office, which is the land management branch of the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority. They manage their lands on behalf of 4 beneficiary groups that are identified in statute to the benefit of those groups, and also local governments within the state. Then certainly, as was mentioned in the introduction by Jim, there are a number of tribal native corporations that have land holdings. Alaska is the largest of those here in southern Southeast Alaska. And then you have private landowners. So this land ownership model is really critical to industry because it means that the industry is primarily dependent on the federal landowner, the US Forest Service, for supply. And Sheila did a great job of talking about briefly in her introductory slides about what the process has been over the years for changes, how there has been input into those changes. We're currently operating under the 2016 Forest Plan for the Tongass National Forest. And one of the greatest challenges that is presented to industry currently, the item that is most related to whether or not the industry will continue to thrive or be successful in the future, is having a predictable timber supply. And what that means for operators like Viking is they need to have volume under contract, though not harvested, for 3 years. They need to be able to look out and say, we know that we have a 3-year supply. And here's why, and that's the same for other operators as well. And here's why that's so important. you cannot enter into new contracts in the export market without knowing what your available supply is going to be moving forward. And this is really important because, for example, Viking Timber provides some of the largest component of Sitka spruce that is supplied to the fine musical instrument productions that are occurring in other parts of the world. So for example, Yamaha has a plant in Indonesia that Viking supplies. The vast majority of fine musical instruments that are made in the world utilize Sitka spruce. It's a very boutique niche. You need to be able to know in advance that you have the supply to move forward with those contracts. So having predictable timber supply is really critical to the industry, and it's been incredibly challenging, to say the least. The Forest Service has been limited in its ability to reach the volumes in the plan for a number of reasons. And so currently industry is really looking to the opportunities to partner with the landowners within the state to create a bridge program for the next 4 years to ensure that our industry will continue to survive. I would also be remiss in not mentioning the fact that litigation has a continual deleterious effect on our industry. We anticipate at AFA, our members anticipate that almost any federal sale that is put up is going to be litigated in some manner. And that litigation is costly to the federal government, it's time consuming, and it ultimately often results in limitations to supply and sale. We spoke earlier about misinformation. That continues to be a consistent challenge to our industry. Having a clear understanding of what the industry actually is, what it does, how it is required to respond to existing federal, state, environmental policies, regulations, all of these items continue to be challenging. But we've been really pleased to see movement in providing good information through partners like those that exist for us with Southeast Conference, for what some of the national and regional organizations are doing around the US to try to provide new detail. And one of the things that AFA is looking forward to is launching some social media campaigns in the near future over the course of 2021 and really starting to engage in the social media platforms in ways that we never have in the past. So trying to dispute and reconcile the information about the industry with what is actually happening is a really important thing for us moving forward. And then just also I spoke about a moment ago, but just reiterating that if your work in Southeast is primarily dependent as an operator on the export market, you have to know what's happening with the export market. And that market is volatile to say the least, and certainly has been in the last 18 to 24 months. For example, the Chinese tariffs that were placed on a number of different products, hardwood products across the country, but specifically hit the Alaska exporters very, very hard. We're looking and hopeful that there will be transitions in those tariffs with the new administration, with the hopeful soon to be announced conferment of Catherine Tai under the US Secretary under the US Trade Organization. But those tariffs place significant burden on our operators as they're exporting. The other then occurrence that's related to those transitions in the market and the tariffs are market transitions. So when COVID hit almost a year ago, one of the things that immediately happened in our industry was you saw halt of all cargo moving into China. At the same time, you saw significant product being dumped from the Eastern European and Russian markets, which really changed the cost factors for our operators. Now, less than a year later, what we're seeing is a complete transition. There's been significantly less cargo traffic coming from Eastern Europe. Both Russia and Australia, which export product into China, have new positions with regard to the current administration that may change whether or not they are exporting at all, which means there's new opportunities in China and Japan for our exporters. In order to take advantage of those new opportunities, they need to know what their long-term supply is and that it's reliable. So these factors play against one another and are part of why it's often so challenging for industry folks to respond to the supply that's provided or to sales. So one of the other challenges in all of this is the movement that started, as Sheila was indicating, from a primarily old growth harvest in the past to a young growth transition. And industry was pleased to be able to provide input into the young growth transition process, to be involved in that process. The challenge for industry is that the transition has been much slower than was originally anticipated. Meanwhile, industry has had to respond by retooling, gathering expertise in the transition. So moving forward, ensuring that we continue to be part of the conversations around the transition and are understanding the data and work that folks like Brian and Terra Verde and the Forest Service are doing and being part of that, so that industry also has appropriate discussions with the landowners about the types of sales that industry can bid on, for example, why they need to be at a certain level, include a certain species grouping so that they aren't deficit sales or sales that do not allow industry to bid on the sales. And then finally, I would say one of the significant challenges that we face in our industry relates to workforce development. So forestry overall is on decline. It certainly is in the state of Alaska. The timber industry specific is primarily an industry that employs individuals over the age of 50. So how do we recruit folks into the forestry management? We also are doing that at a time recognizing that with what has occurred with wildland fires across the country and specific regions of the country, there's a lot of focus on wildland fire management. So how does the forest industry continue to engage with other partners? How do we allow for models for folks to come in and purchase, if they wish, some of the existing operations as individuals in those operations are ready to retire and move out of the industry? We really also face a workforce development crisis that we're trying to think about in partnership with some of our other partners. One item that I think relates to all of this, the challenges, the misinformation, how we continue to support the industry, is really just having practical discussions from our standpoint, which is one of advocacy, about the tongass. So in the last 100 years, only about 2.6% of the tongass has been logged. That's about 440,000 acres. And the tongass overall, as others spoke about earlier, is very large. It's 17 million acres. I had an interesting conversation just the other day with someone who was really concerned about timber harvest that's occurring in the tongass. And the gentleman provided some figures about the amount of harvest that was occurring. And when we ended up talking a bit more, he was surprised to discover that part of what he was considering was actual harvesting that would occur on glacial areas, on areas that are not forested within the tongass. So how do we provide information about the industry that's accurate, talk about our challenges, talk about the market considerations, and also then utilize something that is one of the best opportunities industry has, which is our expertise. So the industry has been operating in Alaska for decades. It's been doing that in an array of different conditions and in partnership with a variety of landowners. All of that means that the forest products industry, particularly in Southeast, has a great deal to offer and share about what we know. And we have really appreciated the opportunity to do that through some really unique agreements and partnerships with federal and state agencies. And certainly Sheila talked about that with the cost share agreement. AFA has been pleased to have an opportunity to participate in cost share agreements that are with the state and the federal government through the U.S. Forest Service, where we appropriately are able to do some mentoring and job shadowing with other individuals from agencies and with trainees, talk about how the industry sees particular areas, discuss what owner layout would look like, all of these discussions that allow for industry expertise to be included in the process. So that certainly is an opportunity that we hope will continue to exist. We're hopeful that the funding for the current agreement will come through and we'll have more conversation and opportunity to do work under that agreement this spring and summer of 2021. The other really important opportunity that exists for us that has continued to be one of the best parts of the bridge that I referred to earlier is partnerships between the federal and state agencies. So for example, this means that the Mental Health Trust Authority is working with the U.S. Forest Service on land transfers. One of those is in the works now, another recently concluded. Those sales will represent one of the most significant sources of supply for the industry moving forward. And so we're really appreciative of the ability to continue to have conversations about what future sales will look like, conversations that AFA would like to have about how we can have an integrated federal and state forest sale plan, timber sale plan, so that industry is able to bid on sales, for example, that are occurring in the same locations, but are timed so that they occur at the same time. Mobilization and demobilization costs can be very high in our business. And so what are the opportunities to have partnered organizations working together so that timber sale programs are integrated to the extent possible to take advantage of the industry expertise that we have. And then also just to work in some of the same areas and work on broader issues such as the Young Growth Transition Plan, to talk about how policy issues at the federal level are going to impact work that's occurring at the state level. That is all that I have to share at this point. I'm happy to take any questions from any of you. And also, I didn't put it on my final slide, but the AFA website is a great resource. We're in the process of revising our website. One of the things we'll be doing in the next couple of months is using the website to do publication of the data gathering we're doing with our members and with our associate members about the link between our employment numbers and other industries that are operating primarily in the tongass. And we'll be sharing that through that website. So I appreciate having the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to take any questions.
So it looks like Tessa Bryan had a question. He says the federal government is rethinking shipping laws to try and allow a 2021 Alaska cruise ship season. Are there discussions around retooling wood products shipping laws?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Brian. We have had a conversation about that in the past. It is not one of the key focuses for AFA right now. I think that it's given some of the other critical items that are on our docket, both at the federal level and at the state level. It's not leading those issues, but we have had a conversation about it. So I don't see any others, Andrea, in the chat section. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all today.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much, Tessa, for your time. We appreciate it.
It looks like Jim has a question.
Jim, go ahead.
I did want to ask the question. Your 440,000 acres of cutover in the tongass. Did that include the native land cutovers too, or was that just within the federal estimate?
Can you repeat the last part of your question, Jim? I'm sorry. I heard the 440 and then something about native corporations. I didn't hear the last part.
Yeah, I wondered if that 440 included cutovers on native lands also, or if the 440 was just restricted to federal ownership.
The 440 is inclusive of the landowners, including the tribal organizations.
Thank you.
And just a reminder, if you want CFE credits, to please share your member number in the chat.
Okay, where does that leave us? Bob and Ed?
Well, I believe we've finished our talks. Appreciate everybody showing up. And Ed, do you have anything to add?
Hey, I just want to thank, let's see, I'm off mute, right?
Yep.
I just want to thank Sheila and Tessa again for joining us today and sharing all their information. I know I took a lot of notes on things, and we had a good day, and we will start again at noon tomorrow, Alaska time. So if there aren't any other questions, we will adjourn and we'll see everybody tomorrow.